You have cancer. Those are 3 words I never expected to hear on a Wednesday afternoon after my physics lab. Now, I'm sure by now you might be expecting this inspirational message, overcoming this cancer journey, being such a strong fighter, being a warrior. Well, sorry to disappoint, but this talk is not about that. It, quite frankly, is the opposite. It was the first week of junior year. I'd just arrived back on campus after spending some time home during the summer. Classes just started, I was getting all settled in, and I was getting ready for the upcoming cross-country season. For reference, I'm from Toronto, Canada, but I ended up going to WVU to compete on the track and cross-country team. Now, during that month, I already felt quite ill. I ended up seeing a few doctors. And finally, the day came, August 24th, 2022. I ended up going into the lab for blood work, probably about the 3rd time that week. And I'd say 8 hours had gone by from when I got in blood work in the morning to when I was being wheeled into the bone marrow transplant unit in the hospital, and doctors were concerned. I mean, they were nervous. I knew leukemia was serious, but they were like, Petal, I don't know if you understand this, but you're gonna need to start chemo like now. And they weren't joking. Just that next day, I had a PICC line inserted into my arm. And following that, I had 2 types of chemos injected into my veins. I'll never forget their names, Donna Rubison and Vin Christine, because they sounded so harmless for literal poison in a bag. But in the briefest way possible, that is how I found out all about me having cancer, specifically acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and how quick my life took a gigantic 180. Now, when I was initially admitted into the hospital, I had an overwhelming amount of support. I mean, people were visiting me, people were bringing me things, people were texting me. I thought that if this was the amount of support cancer treatment would bring, I'm gonna make it through just fine. That month from being admitted on August 24th to being discharged on September 18th, I had all the support that one could possibly ask for. Like, how lucky was I? I knew the circumstances I was in, but this was gonna help it move by a lot smoother. So on that Sunday, when I packed up my stuff and I left the hospital, I was ready to get on with healing, knowing the support I had behind my back. Until crickets. I left the hospital and heard absolute crickets. Most people who visited me in the hospital didn't visit me again. Most didn't even send a text to check in with how I was doing. I was completely ghosted. To be exact, I was cancer ghosted. Now, what is cancer ghosting, as I'm sure this is not a term familiar to most? Cancer ghosting is the phenomenon where friends or family cut you off after you are diagnosed with cancer. A study conducted by a social media networking app called War on Cancer found that 65% of those surveyed found that their relatives or their friends had cut them off after they were diagnosed. This is not an uncommon experience. But of course, while it was happening to me, I thought it was absolutely an uncommon experience. I remember there was this one time, my track team on December 9th was hosting an inter-squad track meet, and this was gonna be followed by a dinner provided to us all. I'd been pretty bedbound for the past few months, so I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to catch up with my friends again. So how it was all set up, there was gonna be a dinner, there was a table for the food, and there were 2 tables for us all to sit at. I was already pretty nauseous that day from chemo, so I knew I wasn't gonna eat anything, but I was most definitely gonna sit and have a chat. So I saw that at one of the tables, there was an empty seat at the edge, and beside that empty seat was somebody I considered myself relatively close with. And so I walked up to them and I said, hey, is anybody sitting in that seat? She just said, and just started to look around. So as I stood there waiting, my other teammate who was sitting across from the empty seat, she asked me like, hey, what was it that you asked? And I asked again, I said, is anybody sitting in that seat? She immediately said no. I said, oh, okay, cool, and I took the seat. As soon as I sat down, my friend beside me looked to the left, she looked to the right, and as soon as she saw an empty seat at the other table, she immediately picked up her plate and went to go sit there. This was when I realized that I was not welcome. At least not anymore. But I mean, have I always been? I recount to freshman year feeling immense culture shock. I mean, I'm from the East End of Toronto. A lot of the kids that I grew up in school with were first-generation Canadian like myself. Our parents were from the islands of the Caribbean, a lot of Southeast Asia. Me specifically, my parents are from Guyana. So going from being the majority to being the minority in this new town was definitely something that I found a bit hard to adjust to. I oftentimes found that it was hard for me to find people who wanted me to be a part of their group. Now, don't get me wrong, I've made some amazing friends while here, but I found that while I wasn't necessarily alone, I was sometimes lonely. Adjusting to going to a PWI was something that I did find hard at first. So you can imagine how exacerbated this feeling was 2 years later when I'm diagnosed with cancer. Because this time, not only was I lonely, but I actually was alone. Now, I recall this one moment. I had this one friend, me and her, we used to talk relatively often. I saw her the day I was discharged from the hospital. She sent me a message the next day expressing how excited she was that I was finally out. And I sent a message back saying that I was excited to be able to hang out with her again. And then crickets. We didn't end up talking to each other for that entire month. So you can imagine my excitement on October 16th at 10:22 p.m. when I received a text from that friend. And I was thinking the text would maybe say, hey, how are you doing? It's been a while, are you feeling okay? But this text instead read, this is such a random question, but what's your orthodontist's name? Now, I was a bit confused when I got this message. It was a random question, but I thought, you know what, maybe this is her lead into a conversation. But then again, crickets. The next text sent between us since my October 16th reply was in March, and this was me wishing her a happy birthday. For reference, my birthday's on February 10th. And I have another one. There was this one friend. We last texted in October, and then the next time she messaged me was in January, on January 10th. And this message wasn't a, hey, how you doing? But it was a, hey, are you going to the basketball game tomorrow? Because I'm trying to see if I can get an extra ticket. Now, while most examples of me being cancer ghosted simply involved people just not talking to me at all anymore, I always found these examples interesting because I always remember the initial excitement I had seeing that my friends were texting me again, only for me to realize that they weren't texting me to check in with me, but they were texting me to get something out of me, whether that be my orthodontist's name or some basketball tickets. So this brings me to why cancer ghosting even is a thing. There's many reasons that can be speculated as to why cancer ghosting happens. A lot of the time, people are just scared. There's a fear of not knowing what to say. There's a fear of not knowing what not to say. Some people are even concerned that cancer may be contagious and could spread. But overall, there's a general consensus that when people do cancer ghost, they're not typically trying to be malicious. A lot of the time, people aren't able to handle seeing somebody that they know suffering. So by them cutting you off, that's them, in a sense, protecting their peace of mind. Which obviously, while that hurts, it's fair enough. Everybody should have the right to protect their peace of mind. But a lot of the time, what also happens is that people hear the word cancer, and automatically, that's all they see. Almost as if they forget who you were before you were diagnosed. When they see you, they see something scary. They see something that they don't want to happen to you or themselves. They see death, or they see something uncomfortable. But the thing is, cancer is not me. Cancer is a disease I was diagnosed with. Cancer is a disease I undergo treatment for. But cancer is not me. Me being diagnosed didn't wipe me clear of my personality or my interests. I mean, I was still doing school even while I was in the hospital. You can ask me how my classes are going. You can ask me what TV shows I'm watching. You can ask me if I want to come to the basketball game with you. But a lot of the time what happens when you're diagnosed is that you're given this label. And this label can become so unrelatable for people that they feel that they're better off just never speaking to you again. And now a lot of the time when we're ghosted or we're rejected, we tend to psychoanalyze like, oh my gosh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. I can't believe they left me on red. I know when I was ghosted, it hurt pretty bad. It was an already vulnerable time, so to add that on top of it definitely didn't help. I started to think, was there something wrong with me? Am I doing something wrong that's getting people who used to talk to me every day to not speak with me again? But then I snapped out of it, and I realized that none of this was my choice. I didn't choose to be diagnosed with cancer, nor did I choose for people to cut me off. But what I did choose to do was to continue living life the way that I wanted to live it. I'm very grateful for the people that I can count on my hand who didn't forget about me while going through what I was. The people who made sure to visit me after I had a spinal tap in my room. The people who texted me to ask me how the day at the cancer center went. And the people who didn't forget that at the end of the day, it's still Petal. Most importantly, I'm glad that I didn't forget that it's still Petal. Because if I did, then I wouldn't have been able to do the many things that I ended up doing that year when dealing with all this cancer stuff. For example, while I was in the hospital, just spending a lot of time there, I had this idea to start a YouTube channel discussing anything medical related. I realized that there were so many things that patients go through that often go underrepresented online. So I figured I would do some research on cases, I would do research on stories, and I would share these. And that's what I did on July 7th, 2023. It took 5 months of me having my channel for me to reach 100,000 subscribers. And the thing I love the most is reading the comments of patients, and not even just patients, just everyday people who have been to the hospital or who have been to the doctors, in the comments saying, wow, thank you for starting this channel. I feel heard. I remember going through this when I was in the hospital, or I remember going through this when I was sick, and nobody ever talks about it. Thank you for giving a voice to those who go unheard. And that's when I realized I may have had all these people who cut me off, but now I have so many others who I'm able to connect with. And the way that I felt isolated or unheard or unseen when I was being ghosted has now taken a full 180 because now I have tens of thousands of people telling me that my videos make them feel seen and make them feel heard. Now, just to circle back to what I was saying in the beginning of the talk, it's not my intention to be inspirational. A lot of the time with cancer patients, people expect them to be warriors or expect them to be fighters. I've never considered myself to be a warrior or a fighter. There's no war or fight going on inside of this body, just healing and recovery. And there's no right or wrong way to do cancer. It's not a fun time. And while it's great that people can be inspirational, people can get inspired, nobody should be expected to be an inspirational poster child. The main thing that I've gathered and that I would like for you all to take away today is that at the end of the day, you always have yourself. So if you're moving mountains for others, that's great. But before you move mountains for others, you should be moving mountains for yourself. And if you have that lingering idea of something you want to do it. Because your life can change just like that. You can lose your friends just like that. But at the end of the day, you'll always have control of being able to avoid saying, I regret not doing that. And while I and many others have had the unfortunate experience of feeling what cancer ghosting is, I'm very grateful for those who made an effort to make sure I didn't feel isolated. They know who they are. And to those who did ghost me, I'm sure they know who they are as well. There are no hard feelings. I completely understand that anyone finding out a peer had cancer, that would definitely be something hard to deal with. It's not familiar for anyone. But what I will say is, while many cancer patients prefer different things when they're diagnosed, nobody prefers to be ghosted. I can guarantee that. It would never hurt to send a text to somebody, even once a month, just checking in with how they're doing. A simple text can help boost one's spirits and can help them feel less isolated during an already vulnerable time. And who knows, maybe that one text is all they need to help move their own mountains. Thank you.